that they're making. So let's start first by talking about getting prepared financially. I think in terms of the content today, this is the area that probably is going to be the newest. This is not stuff that we often talk about in a presentation like this. So I hope you'll bear with me. It's a tad in the weeds. I'm going to try to keep it out of the weeds. But it does talk about how things work behind the scenes in the financial aid office, because I do think that has a huge impact on what people experience on the outside. So the decision-making process starts so early, and the earlier that people can start to prepare, the better. What we find too often is that families don't start thinking about paying for higher education until maybe senior year of high school, maybe junior year. And I just want to be clear that when I'm talking about paying for college or higher education, we really look at that as everything. We're talking about 4-year schools, 2-year schools, certificate programs. We want students to pursue the pathway that's best for them. But we don't want students to be limited to a certain pathway because they can't afford other options. So we're going to start by talking about 2 areas that can help students and families have more options. And the first one is going to be related to college savings. So saving for college is absolutely critical. And I think that, you know, my goal in talking about these things, and as the mom of 2 kids, one that's graduated and one that's still in college, you know, savings is really hard. And we're not talking about saving everything. We're not talking about trying to save, you know, enough money to pay the whole bill. What we're talking about is that any amount of savings can be beneficial and is absolutely critical. And the reason why it's so important is that for our lowest income families, so sometimes people will think, and I've experienced this in my first years in the financial aid office, that, you know, our lower income families usually were okay. There was enough financial aid so that they had the money they needed to get their bills paid. But what we've seen happen over time is that the aid is not there in the way that it used to be, or the aid has stayed stable and costs have gone up is really what's happened. And so even our most needy students are finding that they have a balance after all of their financial aid has been applied. And so having some savings is critical for them. The only schools in Maine that meet full need, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, are Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby. So at many of those other schools, students are going to have a balance. Then the other piece that we see that's challenging for families and why the need for savings is so important are our middle income families find that their expected family contribution, or their EFC, is much higher than anticipated. Now, what do I mean by that? So we go through these processes where we fill out FAFSAs, the free application for federal student aid, and it's a formula, and it takes your information and it spits out this number that says, theoretically, this is what families can expect to pay, can be expected to pay. And schools use that number. What we find, and I experienced it myself, and I just had the benefit of knowing it much earlier than many other families because of the work I did, families are absolutely shocked by what that EFC is when they filed the FAFSA. So I wanted to take a look at kind of what some of those EFCs look like. This is for, imagine an average, a family of 4, earning these amounts of money across the top: $40,000, $60,000, $90,000, $120,000. Let's assume for the purposes of right now, these families have no savings at all. Okay, so savings is not coming into play at all. Here is what their expected family contributions would look like. So you are going to see that, you know, for a family in the $40,000 range, you know, that's probably reasonable. They can probably do that. You start getting up to $60,000, it becomes much harder. And then look at that jump to $90,000. So that's, you know, if you have a family where, you know, one person's earning, you know, $45,000 and the other person's earning, you know, $45,000, to think that those families are going to be able to pay $11,000 out of pocket for their EFC, it blows them away. They are so caught off guard by this. And then, as you can see, as the incomes go up even further, the EFC obviously takes a huge jump. Now, one of the things, this is where the little getting in the weeds piece comes in, but I think it's helpful to know, is that what happens is that families, let's say less than $50,000, find the EFCs to be much more in the neighborhood of what they expect. It's when families start earning over that amount that the EFC starts to jump dramatically. And why that is the case is because built into the formula, there's an acknowledgement that families have to run their household. It's called the income protection allowance. And it assumes that they have to pay rent and buy food and have electricity and all of those basic things. The problem is that that income protection allowance has no connection to what a family earns. So it is a set amount. So for example, for a family of 4, it's about $28,000 per year. So for a family that's earning $40,000, you know, maybe that's in the neighborhood. But we all know what happens as people tend to earn more money. They tend to spend more money. So to think that a family that's earning $120,000 is maybe running their household on $27,000, I don't think most of those families are doing that. I think that they are probably, you know, living up to their income, which means they're spending a heck of a lot more on some of those expenses than the formula recognizes. So just again, a snapshot of kind of what these EFCs would look like. But if you think about the families that you work with and you think about, you know, these families that are earning these amounts of money, very rarely, especially once you get over 50,000, do people have the ability to cover those EFCs. And so they're shocked by those. So what does that actually translate to? So when we talk about a family where the parents are earning $100,000 a year, for example, that EFC is going to be a little over $15,000. So here is how a school, all schools, you award financial aid. It's a very, very basic formula to start, and then it gets more complicated. But on the surface, what a school does is says, this is how much it costs to attend our school. So I've come up with an average cost of attendance of $21,000. The University of Maine system schools, some are a little bit less than that, some are a little bit more. I just used an average, okay? So cost of attendance is tuition, fees, room, board, books, supplies, and other miscellaneous expenses, okay? So at many of the University of Maine system schools, it's, you know, $8,000 to $10,000 for tuition, $8,000 to $10,000 for room and board, and then those other expenses. That's what makes up the cost of attendance. So for this family that's earning $100,000, their EFC, expected family contribution, as a result of filing the FAFSA, is $15,000, a little bit more. So what that means is that when the school starts off and is looking at their students' financial aid eligibility, they say, okay, our cost minus what the family can contribute, this student has just a little under $6,000 in financial need, okay? Now, schools try to fill that need. But in reality, what you're going to find at the vast majority of all of these schools, the University of Maine system schools, the vast majority of the time, the only thing the student is going to be receiving in terms of need-based aid is going to be their federal subsidized direct loan, okay? Now, some of these students might be eligible for merit-based aid, but typically the only need-based aid they're going to get is that federal direct loan, that's subsidized. And that is shocking to people. You know, people who are earning this amount of money, looking at sending their students to a 4-year public institution, are not prepared that basically they are going to not get any need-based aid. But that is the reality. My guess is that many of you have had those conversations with students and families who are so caught off guard by this, they just didn't expect it. Part of our purpose today is to help families anticipate this so that they can plan accordingly. So then let's talk just a moment about our lower income students. So our students with those lowest EFCs and where the issue is for them and why it's still a challenge for them and why savings is important even in their cases. So think about the program that the University of Maine system has at several of their campuses, UMFK, UMA, UMPI, UMM. They have a program where if a student is Pell eligible, the student is going to find that all of their tuition and fees are going to be covered by grants and scholarships, which is amazing, which is wonderful. And that sounds so good. And it is a really, really good positive thing. But what that also means is that usually, I won't say always, but oftentimes the grants and scholarships are covering the tuition and fees. But if the student is planning to live on campus, they still have to find a way to cover their room and board expenses. Now, that's where the federal loan can come in. So they can borrow their $5,500 in their federal loan. But oftentimes, room and board is going to be $8,000 or $8,500 per year. So as you can see, there's a gap there. And so that even our most needy students are finding that they can have a gap between what they owe and what they get in financial aid of several $1,000s, okay? So that's the scenario with our lowest income students. And then with our students who are more middle income, we're going to find that they have that gap plus their EFC. So that is why savings is so important, because otherwise, how do families pay that bill? So what if they had been able to save? And again, I'm not talking about saving everything, but what if they had been able to save some? The thought is that saving for college is a bad thing, that it's going to have a negative impact on financial aid eligibility. So I want to show you that in reality, it doesn't have that negative impact on financial aid eligibility that people think. This is a myth that we are just doing our darndest to debunk, because we really need families to save. So what you can see in front of you is that I've kind of flipped it. So in this case, the income is the same for all 4 of these families. Their income is $67,000 per year. At a $67,000 income per year, the EFC, and again, ballparking this, although this federal formula is available, so if anyone is interested in kind of doing it for themselves, it's available, and it's also, it can be done online on the College Board site. So reach out to me if you want more information about this piece. So $67,000 translates to an EFC from income of about $4,600, give or take. The EFC is made up of 2 parts: contribution from income, contribution from assets. So let's take a look at, with families who have assets, who have savings, what is the impact on the EFC? And I'm just going to digress for one moment and say, and let you know that, and I'm sure you probably already know this, that when we talk about assets, most assets are already excluded from the FAFSA. So the primary residence is excluded from the FAFSA. Funds that are saved in a retirement account are excluded from the FAFSA. Small family-owned businesses with fewer than 100 employees are already excluded from the FAFSA. So what we're looking at here are people who, let's just say, have this amount of assets sitting in a bank account. So that family that's earning $67,000 has no savings. Their EFC is $4,614. What about the family who has $25,000 saved for college, or $25,000 sitting in a savings account? Does their EFC go up? Yep, it does. But look by what little amount. It goes up by $635. So yes, they might lose $635 of financial aid, but they've got $25,000 available to meet that gap and make that affordable, make going to college affordable and doable, hopefully without having to borrow excessive amounts. Even when those savings amounts increase really dramatically, like, I'm going to be honest with you, most people don't have $50,000 in college savings. And I don't know that I know anyone that had $100,000 in college savings. But even in their cases, look how much the impact is. It still is very minimal. It is a very small percentage. The maximum percentage is going to be a little over 5%, but in reality, the way the formula works, the lower the income is, the less the percentage is. So it's usually 2 to 3, 4% maybe of their savings having any impact on their EFC. So that is one of the things that we want to be sure that we hope people take away from this session, and spread the word that savings is not what's impacting financial aid eligibility. Having savings is a really good thing and provides families with options. Now, for many of you who have sat down and done the FAFSA with students, you will notice that in some cases, students aren't even required, or their parents aren't required either, to provide any asset information on the FAFSA. So the way the FAFSA works is that when you complete the FAFSA, if your income is less than $50,000, typically, you don't even have to provide asset information. You don't even have to acknowledge the fact that you might have money in savings. So in those cases, obviously, it has no impact at all. So what I think has happened over the years sometimes is that maybe a family has saved, and maybe a family has felt like they haven't gotten the financial aid that they wish they had gotten. But here's the reality. It wasn't because they saved. It was because they were never going to be eligible for as much financial aid as they had hoped because of the EFC and other factors. But they've attributed it to savings when that's not the case. And it's allowed this myth to perpetuate. So we just want to spread the word that saving for college, even in small amounts, any little bit helps. And it simply gives a family and students many, many more options. So when it comes to savings, there are all sorts of ways to save for college. There's no doubt that some are better than others. It's always better to save in the parent's name than in the student's name. If a student is saving in their name, there is a little bit of more of an impact on the EFC if they have to provide asset information on the FAFSA. So we can, go into detail on any of these. You can follow up with me. We can do sessions on, the various savings vehicles. But some of the things that are commonly used vehicles are 529s. So in Maine, you may be familiar with our 529, which is NextGen. NextGen, you can learn more about by going to nextgenforme.com, and just mention that there are matching grants available. There are things called Coverdell's, which are also ways of saving for college. Savings bonds, my kids still have a few of those. Roth IRAs and other types of investments are possible. I will say that trusts, UGMAs and UPMAs are not the best way to save for college because they do have more of an impact because they're always going to be in a student's name. So we can go into this detail at another time if you're interested. So just reach out to me if you want to talk more about that. But bottom line is saving is good and positive. There's lots of ways to do it. There's matching funds available in many cases. We can move on from that, but just the thought that saving is so incredibly important. So now we've got our family saving, hopefully. And so that hopefully is going to help a little bit. But what other things can families do to have more options? And I think this is one of these times where, in the time of COVID, while we're going through a pandemic, it's not that I don't get how difficult it is for families. My husband was laid off for a period of time. It's a difficult time to even have this conversation. So it's not, I know we're taking a pause on a lot of things, but hopefully things are going to rebound, and hopefully they're going to rebound really quickly. And the challenge is that even when things were good, people weren't doing many of these things. So maybe, just maybe as a result of going through all this, families will maybe step back and say, okay, maybe we need to do things differently or look at things differently in the future. And that's not to say that no families were doing this, but a lot of families really were not planning ahead until their students were hitting senior year. So we think one of the ways to make paying for school more affordable is to start thinking about some of the things they can do in terms of their general financial wellness, specifically as their students start to enter high school, so a little bit earlier than many families might now. So one of the things that we encourage families to think about is, can they pay off other debt, and reduce financial obligations? So one day I heard someone say, they asked a question about, should I go out and buy a boat? So that I have more, I get rid of my savings. And I'm like, no, that's like one of the absolute worst things that families can do, because again, the savings isn't going to have the impact, and having those financial obligations is going to make it even more difficult to pay for college. So one of the things we talk about is, can you maybe look at your car payments? So is there a way to figure out, okay, can we get a car payment down or paid off so that when the student is ready to go on to college, maybe we don't have as many other payments? Can we pay down those credit cards? Can we get ourselves in a better financial position so that when it is time to pay for college, there's money freed up in that family budget, so that a portion of that savings or money that they have in their budget can then be used for a tuition payment plan. So a tuition payment plan is a plan where families pay a portion of their tuition throughout the year. So most of the schools do it either on a semester basis, where you make 4 or 5 payments throughout the semester, the fall semester, and then the same for spring semester, or they might have an annual payment plan that maybe runs 10 payments. These are not loans. They don't charge interest. There usually is just a small enrollment fee. But what we found is that when families can put aside money within their family budget and use it to help do a tuition payment plan, that makes paying for college more affordable. A lot of families, when we have conversations with them and say, do you have any money that you're able to pay towards the bill? In savings, they'll say no. Do you have any money within your budget where you can do a tuition payment plan? And they'll say no. So because they don't have those things, their options are so much more limited. So we really love the idea of tuition payment plans. Think of it like with my kids' braces. If I'd had to pay for the braces all up front, that wouldn't have been manageable. But spreading it over a period of time, especially at no interest, just made it a little bit more manageable. So here's another benefit of saving for college, and you're a friend of mine, Mary Dyer, is the one who, she and I were having conversations because we've spent a lot of time over the years talking about things, but she mentioned this specifically, which is when you're already making a contribution to a college savings plan, you've already gotten used to living on less. So let's just say you've been contributing, $100 per month or $200 per month or whatever might be possible. When your student starts college, you're already used to not having that $100 to $200 a month. And instead, you could take that $100 to $200 and use that for your tuition payment plan. Now, sometimes you might want to continue to save, or you might have other kids. But the point is, if you're already used to living on less, then you can just take that and divert that money to the tuition payment plan. We talk with a lot of families who have maybe childcare expenses, that when their kids are transitioning into full-time school, at kindergarten or even before in some cases, before you ever get used to having that extra money in your budget, divert it to something else that you need to pay for. And that can, if you never see it, if you get used to not having it, that's the beauty of direct deposit and direct withdrawals out of your checking account. If you never see it, you don't miss it quite so much. So that's another thought to consider, another benefit of saving for college. And then this one is a really big one, I think, that we need to talk more about. So we need to talk about it, but then families also need to talk about what the plan is to pay for college. And in the perfect world, this conversation, I think, would start long before senior year. So it's been so interesting having my own kids and going through this process. And so my oldest son is 25 now. And when I first started in this job at Fame and I was going around and doing financial aid nights, he was in high school and he would often come with me. So he'd drive with me and he'd sit in the back and he'd do his homework. And, I really just always loved the time we had in the car going to and from locations. But as a result of that, we had conversations that I know are not very exciting and probably most students and parents aren't having. We talked about financial aid. He was picking up a lot of what I was talking about. So we made the decision to be very honest with him about what we could do in terms of paying for college. I had, again, had the forewarning of kind of what was coming by working in a financial aid office. So we were saving some. We knew we didn't have saved anywhere near what we needed to, probably, but we had some. And, this whole idea of paying the cars down or whatever, we were working hard on to have a tuition payment plan available. But it was limited. There was a set amount that I felt, my husband and I could do. And so Alex knew that amount. And so going into the application process, going into senior year, when he started receiving those financial aid offers, he knew what we could do. And I won't go into more detail today. Some of you have probably heard this story, but let's just say he did not go where he wanted to that first year. And he didn't because none of the financial aid offers at the schools that he really had his heart set on in Boston were even close to what we could afford. And so we made that really tough decision to say, you know what, hon, you can't do it. He didn't get into the school that he wanted to, the top of his list school. So he went to a different school that was much more affordable. And then his sophomore year, he transferred to that school that he had hoped to get into that he got waitlisted at. And that school, was in Boston where he wanted to be and had really good financial aid. So we were able to make that work. But my point is that when he was a senior and he started getting those financial aid offers, because we'd had the conversation for months, probably a year or two prior to that, it made it easier. He could do the math. He could see what the end result was going to be. And it just made it still difficult, but easier than it would have been otherwise. For any parents out there who've had seniors in high school, the spring of senior year, even not in a pandemic, is crazy. And it's so emotional. So anything that can be any of that groundwork that can be laid and expectations set ahead of time, I think is just going to make it a little bit easier when that time comes. So having that conversation, who's going to pay for what? I think we still have parents out there who might remember their experience where, I remember I went to Maine and a semester of tuition was $750. It's just not that way anymore. So having a conversation about what is the reality, who's going to cover what, will help make these conversations easier down the road. And then one of the last pieces in the financial wellness section that I wanted to talk about is this concept that we talk a lot about, that paying for college is really a piecemeal approach. So I'm a pie person, I love pie. And so if you think about a piece of pie And the more pieces that you cut that pie into, the smaller each piece is, right? So the reality is that the more pieces that we have to pay for college, the smaller each piece needs to be. So if we think about this scenario where a student might get financial aid, need-based financial aid, they have some savings, maybe the student has a little bit of savings, but primarily the parents have some savings. They can do a tuition payment plan, because tuition payment plans, you can just do it for the amount that you're comfortable with. Maybe they're going to get some merit aid because of their grades and their academic standing. The student's going to work over the summer. That's another whole conversation that my kids and I always have, is working over the summer and saving a good portion of that money from over the summer, and using it as student savings to pay for the next year. And then scholarships also being an important piece of that. So for families who are going to rely only on the financial aid, they need a heck of a lot of financial aid to make that work. But if they have all of these pieces instead, those pieces can each be smaller, which is why we're not talking about saving the whole thing. We just need it as a piece of this pie to make paying for college affordable. Unfortunately, too many families that we work with don't have these things in place, or they have only a small amount of financial aid and maybe nothing else. And so that's when people end up borrowing more than we wish that they would. So if families can start thinking about this earlier, as difficult as it is, and I'm not by any means trying to portray that these are easy things, but every little bit that families can do to put themselves in a better situation and start early are going to make paying for college that much easier when they get to that point. All right, so now we're going to do a transition. So we kind of talked about step one, having families get as prepared as possible. And then now we want to talk about when it's senior year and students are starting to think about the schools that they want to apply to, having built that list. And I would actually encourage students to start building their list or thinking about this even before senior year, certainly in the junior year, maybe even a little bit sooner. And one of the things that we really encourage students and families to do is to research schools from a financial aid perspective. Now, I am someone who believes that students have to go to a school that's going to be a good fit for them academically, socially, where the location is, all of those things. At the end of the day, we need students to be at a school where they can be successful and they can graduate. So that is incredibly important. And I am not someone who's going to say, you always have to go to the school that's most affordable financially, because if the student isn't happy and can't be successful, then we shot ourselves in the foot. But there is a balance, right? So there are almost 4,000 schools out there. There are many, many schools available. And so we want to be sure that students, when they're researching schools, are not only looking for schools that are a good fit academically, but also have the potential to be a good fit when it comes to the financial aid piece of things. So we want families to think about paying for college or the cost of college in terms of the net price, not the sticker price. So what we think about is, you might hear that certain schools out there cost $70,000 a year. But in reality, many of those really high-priced schools, at least some of them, have really good financial aid. So families are not paying $70,000. They're paying, whatever the amount is, minus the grants and scholarships that they receive from the school. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about net price. It's the cost that a student is going to pay for 1 year after subtracting grants and scholarships, again, the funds that don't have to be repaid. That's what really matters. The sticker price does not matter. What matters is the cost that that student and family are going to have to pay, and that takes into account the grants and scholarships that they are potentially eligible to receive. So one of the things that can be really helpful to help figure out what that individual student might pay is to just start the really basic search of what percent of need is a school meeting. So remember back in the first section, we talked about how schools award financial aid. They take the cost of attendance, tuition fees, book supplies, room and board, travel, miscellaneous. They subtract out that EFC, and that gives you the amount of need a student has. In the perfect world, every school would meet 100% of that need. If every school met 100% of a student's need, we wouldn't need to be having this conversation about the financial aspects of it, right? The student could just pick the school based on everything else. But the reality of where we are today, unfortunately, is that not all schools meet 100% of that need. Not all schools can fill 100% of that need. And there are very few schools, to be honest with you, that are able to do that. So looking at a school and having a sense of how much need they fill on average, I'm not talking about people making decisions here, I'm simply talking about information gathering to be able to figure out a good list of schools. One place to start is to search for schools by the percent of need that can be met on average by that school. So probably you're all familiar with the College Board's Big Future site. I think this is a fabulous tool for searching for schools. It allows you to search for schools based on all sorts of different criteria. So you can see over on the left-hand side, you can search based on your major, you can search based on location, you can search based on special programs they have available, all sorts of different things. So I really love this site. One of the things that when you go and you look at a specific school, I've got College of the Atlantic up here, you are going to find that for most schools, every now and then it's missing, but for most schools, down in the bottom, I'm touching it, but you can't quite see it, it's going to say what the percent of need met is. So it just gives you an indication when you look at a school that, okay, this school meets 82% need. Okay, so that means if I have need of $10,000, on average, the school is going to give me $8,200, okay? Some schools, again, meet 100%, not a lot of them. There are a whole slew of schools that meet probably 60, 70, 80%. And then there are schools that actually meet way less than that. Now, when I was working with, or when Alex was in high school and we were talking about this, he looked this up one day for a school that he was interested in, and it was really awful. The percent of need was like 40%, percent of need met, excuse me, was like 40%. Now, I did say to him, you can still apply to that school. That school can still be on your list, but I need to be sure that you've got a bunch of other schools on your list, or at least several other schools that are also a good fit, because based on that one statistic, and it's only one statistic, but it's pretty telling, the financial aid is not probably going to be great. So students, if they're looking at a school, can check that out and get a sense of that. But you can actually even search for schools based on this criteria. So this is, again, the Big Future site. You can see the criteria that I was just talking about on the left, and you will see that one of the pieces of a criteria is paying. So if you click on paying, you're going to see the screen that's on the right. And you can search on schools that meet a certain percent of need. So for example, one of the things I said to Alex when he was looking to transfer is, let's start, because he had a very flexible major, let's start by looking at schools that meet at least 80% need. So that narrowed that number down, because how this site works, this is what I just love about it. You start out with about 3,800 schools, and then it filters them down to a more manageable amount. So based on major, location, and percent of need met, he was able to get his list down to, a manageable number of schools to really dig into and look at more specifically. So I think that's a great feature that I would really love to have students and parents take a look at as they're starting to build their list of schools. Now, they're wanting to go a bit deeper. So let's just say they started out, no idea what schools were kind of on their list. They've now got their schools down to maybe a manageable amount. One of the things they can do is check out the net price calculator that is supposed to be available on every school's website. So every school that has federal financial aid funds is supposed to have a net price calculator. It's usually on the financial aid page. What a net price calculator does is takes this all one step further. The net price calculator uses that school's specific information, what they have available for, financial aid, how much their costs are, that school's specific information, and has the family provide their specific information that's very similar to what's going to be asked on the FAFSA. And then based on that, they estimate what the student might be eligible to receive that first year. So up next, I'm going to show you two net price calculators for two schools where I use the exact same information, okay? So I did the income of $67,000, came up with this EFC, and I used the exact same information. Look at the comparison. So we've got two schools here that are literally within a mile or two of each other in the Boston area. They're both, in the same ballpark. Actually, this is a little bit, this is I think from last year, so the cost has actually increased a little bit, but both very expensive schools. but look at the difference in the amount of grant money specifically, because grants and scholarships are good, and those are the funds that don't have to be repaid, but look at the difference. So here are two schools that on the surface may seem very similar, but by doing some research and using the net price calculator tool, you can see that on the financial aid side of things, these are very, very different schools. And one is going to be much more affordable than the other, at least based on this. Now, I never want anyone to make a decision based on a net price calculator. That is not the goal here, because it is just an estimate. And some schools are better than others in terms of their reliability of their net price calculator. But just in this example, it gives you a sense of, okay, these are different schools when it comes to the financial aid perspective. And if the school on my left is the school that I really, really want to go to, I need to be sure that I have some other schools that I'm looking at, because the amount that's remaining after grants and scholarships, and even after federal student loans, is probably not going to be manageable for that family. At least not without borrowing huge amounts of money. And that's the problem we get into, is that sometimes families make decisions to attend a particular school long before they've ever gotten the financial aid offer. And when the offer comes, it's just not manageable. But because they've committed mentally, emotionally to that school, even if they haven't sent in a deposit yet, there seems like there's no turning back. And that's when those families will sometimes say, I'll do whatever it takes. We'll figure it out. And they will borrow loans that are just way beyond the ability to repay those down the road. So I am a fan of net price calculators. I recognize their flaws and their limitations, but I still think it's one more piece of information that can be helpful when building that list of schools. So as I've just kind of said, you don't want to make a decision based on net price calculator. It's just another information point. If the school offers a lot of merit aid, that might have a very different end result. Merit aid is not always going to be factored into a net price calculator. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So that's going to impact things. You know, and even if the estimated aid isn't great, you know, the student can still apply and see what they're actually going to be offered, because a student won't know what their specific financial aid is going to look like until they get that financial aid offer in their senior year. So they you know, if parents feel like they can go ahead and do that, but knowing that they need to have many choices available to them, just in case that school that doesn't look that good when doing the net price calculator, that if in the end, that's what the reality is, that they've got other options available to them. And I think one of the things, and it's so hard to not get your heart set on a school. I think it's one of those things we talk about schools. We, you know, hopefully students are being able to visit schools, and they might go step on a campus and think, this is my place. This is where I need to be. This is the only place where I can accomplish what I want to accomplish. And then maybe the financial reality doesn't match up with what we would like. So students, whenever possible, if they can try not to do that, try not to emotionally commit to a school as early as some students do, I think that that's a good thing, but incredibly hard. I recognize that. So we want to be sure that students have a list of multiple schools, maybe 4 to 8. You know, I don't want students to go crazy and have, you know, 15 schools on their lists when it comes to actually applying and doing financial aid, because that becomes unmanageable for its own reasons. But, you know, at least having 4 to 8 schools that the student really feels like are good fits for them. And I really encourage families to have at least one financial aid safety school. So just like we talk about a school being a safety school academically, you know, having an option that's available that, again, is a good fit for the student in all other ways, but also looks like financially would be affordable to the family, even if the financial aid doesn't turn out to be what they would like it to be. All right, now on to our last section. And this, I think, is going to be much more familiar to all of you. This is information that we share in other sessions, but I just want to go over it and make sure that you are aware of some of the resources we have and some of the resources that exist externally to help students make some of these decisions. So we want to be sure that students get that apples to apples comparison. My other coworkers and I, if you laid 3 award letters or financial aid notifications, we're saying now, in front of us, it's very difficult for us, even after all of our combined 100+ years of working in financial aid, to get a sense of which school is most affordable, because every award notice looks different, includes different information. And so the best thing that students can do is to make sure that they're getting an apples to apples comparison. What we want them to do is to first focus on the direct cost after grants and scholarships. So we say, look at tuition and fees, room and board, you're gonna be living on campus, subtract out grants and scholarships. Do that for school A, do that for school B, and do that for school C. And because then you can read right across that line and see how one compares to the other, taking out all of the other information, boil it down to that, and that's going to be a really helpful starting point. And then if you need to borrow, subtract out the federal direct loan. That's if students are going to have to borrow, we recommend that they borrow federal direct loans first. So then you can subtract that out. To make that easier, we have a form that's available on our website that can do just that. So again, on the there's an example there, but then the student can list 3 schools, start with direct costs, minus grants and scholarships, look at what how they compare across that line, reduce that by direct loans, see how they look. Those are usually going to be the same amount at all the schools, and then they can make an informed decision about the cost of those schools. On the back, we provide additional information as to what options might exist to pay the rest of that bill. So that's another piece that's there. That kind of gets to that piecemeal approach I was talking about a moment ago. So again, this is on our website. It's famemaine.com under quick links, tools and calculators. So it's available. We'd love to have you share it. It's something if you wanted to put on your website, however you want to. Everything that we produce at FAME is available to you. You can use it with your students. You can use it with your families. You don't need to ask us. If that's the whole reason that we've developed some of these resources, is to make them available. Another thing that's really important is to consider the return on investment. And I will tell you, I didn't think about this necessarily so much in my early days in the financial aid office. We didn't award aid differently based on a student's major. I don't think most schools do, with maybe some minor exceptions. But the reality is that the engineering student had a lot more ability to repay loans because their earnings were going to be higher than maybe the social work major who went and got a master's degree, but still did not have the same earning potential. So I think taking that into account and just having it be one more thing that's being thought about as students are making these decisions is really important. You know, I don't like at all that we live in a world where students have to make decisions about their future based on pay and income. You know, wouldn't we love just students to do what they feel passionately about and have that be manageable and all be able to earn a living that's you know, able to get us to where we want to be regardless of what the field is. But that is kind of where we're at. So one of the things that is possible is to go to Career One Stop. So Career One Stop is a place where students can research their potential earnings and benefits. So here, what you're going to see is that I've just looked up a nurse practitioner. And this came from the fact that I had a student I was working with who was a nurse practitioner that had borrowed $150,000 and was panicked about how she was going to repay that. So what we recommend is if students can go and check this out and see what their potential earnings look like. Again, just a data point, nothing to build their future around or because it's not a sure thing. But here, I always like to start on the low side, you know, because it shows you low, median, and high income. So assuming out of school, students are probably going to be on the low end. So let's say the student is looking at probably earning about $74,000 when she first gets out of school, okay? Or in Maine, you can, and what's cool about this is you can look at it based on Maine, or you can look at it based on national, or you can even look at it on specific locations. So one day I put in, you know, 04401 for Bangor, and then I put in Portland just to kind of see the differences. So that's also a possibility on the site. It's a great site, tons and tons of awesome information that goes far beyond just salaries as well. Okay, but we've determined that the student probably can guesstimate that her earnings once she graduates would be about $74,000. So then we have this tool on our website, again, famemaine.com, quick tips under tools and calculators, where it's a student loan salary calculator. So what the student can do is the student can put in on the left-hand side there their expected salary. And when they do that, it will give them an estimate of what the amount is that they could borrow and comfortably repay. So basically, a student who's earning $74,000 a year probably doesn't want to borrow any more than $46,000 if they want to comfortably be able to repay that once they leave school. Now I have here, you can see what I used for an interest rate. I used a 10-year repayment plan. We do know that loan repayments can be spread out over 20 or 25 years, but again, that has consequences. So for this purpose, I just picked the 10 years, okay? So that would give a student information. So if every student before they borrowed a penny would do something like this, it would give them a sense of what might be manageable or reasonable for this. On the other side, what you're going to see is you also can go ahead and put in the amount that the student borrowed, and then you can see what they need to earn to do that. And so you're going to see here that they have to earn like over $200,000 to comfortably repay this. So what we're wanting to do is to avoid that disconnect. Okay, so doing this ahead of time, I think, can be beneficial. I know I am out of time, so I'm just going to leave you with these few remaining thoughts that I think it's important to make it relatable. This is one of the things Alex said to me, is that, you know, these numbers are so large, it's hard to wrap your head around them when you're, you know, 18 or 20 or 21. So breaking them down, and, you know, the rule of thumb that I use is for every $10,000 that a student borrows, that's going to translate to a payment of about $100 a month. So when I'm talking with a family yesterday and they're talking about borrowing $23,000 per year over 4 years, I can do a rough estimate of what that's going to look like, and it's frightening, to be honest. So that's why I wish they'd make a different decision that I don't think they are going to do. So we can also, if you're needing to borrow more loans, we have some resources available for that. The Loan For Me is a great site that's fame-based, that has information just to help people make an informed decision. We're never going to tell people who they should borrow from. That's a personal decision based on their specifics, but we do have information that can help them make that decision. And then we have information and resources available in all sorts of ways. So you can check these out at any point in time. So we just want to be sure in closing that students have as many options as possible, that there are multiple pathways. There is not only one way for a student to achieve their goals, and knowing that can be helpful. And that the student, you know, if they can live on the cheap and really try to be, you know, very, very careful financially while they're in school, that's going to pay off in the long run. You know, sometimes it looks like students are living better, you know, their living accommodations and everything are better while they're in school than they are after they graduate. So we kind of want to flip that, make those sacrifices while you're in school, try to borrow less money so that when you are finished with school, you can live the life that you want to. So in closing, this is how you can reach us. You can reach us by email, phone, or whatever. And all of us can be reached at our first initial and last name at famemaine.com. So I'm M. Tappan at famemaine.com. So reach out to me if you have any questions. Emma, do I have you there? And is there anything before I finish up and have you transition over to the next presentation that you need from me? Oh, it's not Emma. Sorry, Brett.
Oh, I thought Emma was here too, but that's all right.
Okay.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes to switch the next
Okay.
session. But Mila, I'd like to send you a couple questions,
Sure.
and maybe you can get back to us on those.
Absolutely.
And then we'll get them out to everybody in the end of conference materials.
Mm-hmm.
There's some great questions, and it might be, we don't have enough time for them now, and I want to let everybody get a drink of water or go to the bathroom before.
That's what I figured. Yeah.
But
I knew we were going to be hard pressed. This is normally an hour presentation, so I knew we were going to be hard pressed, but I wanted people to have all of that, and figured I was more than happy to follow up with questions afterwards. Either the ones that were asked here, or anyone at any time can always reach out to me. I'm more than happy to discuss any of this further.
Well, thank you very much. It was very informative.
I hope so. So thank you so much. You guys have a great rest of your day. I'll see you maybe at some other sessions later. Take care and have a nice weekend, okay?
Thanks, Mila.
Bye.
All right. All right, let's look. There's Jake.
Hey, guys.
How are you? So we're just letting people take a quick little break, and then we'll get started in a few minutes.
Sounds great. Can I just test my screen share for a moment, make sure it works?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Can you see that?
Yeah. You can leave it up too if you want. That would let people
And I
know where
just
we
need to
are.
move it to the other screen because otherwise it looks like I'm looking sideways and that's annoying. So